of the magnitude to making it all work. So the plot, being an imitation of an action, must imitate one action, and that a whole. The structural union of the parts being such that if any one of them is displaced or removed, the whole will be disjointed and disturbed. For a thing whose presence or absence makes no visible difference is not an organic part of the whole. There should be nothing extraneous, nothing surplus to requirement. Every part of the play should inform every other part, as there is in a good poem. Every part of it is necessary, every part of it is deliberate, every part is working together to create something bigger than itself, to create what's called a gestalt. It's a bit of a mouthful. Poetry, history, and liberal humanist universalism. And this is why poetry is important. Not just because it's nice, or it rhymes, or has good meter. The poet and the historian differ not by writing in verse or in prose, because people would write their histories in verse. The true difference is that one relates what has happened, the other what may happen. Poetry, therefore, is a more philosophical and a higher thing than history. Next time you're speaking to someone who's studying history, remember to say that. Poetry is a more philosophical and a higher thing than history. Why? For poetry tends to express the universal, history the particular. By the universal, I mean how a person of a certain type will on occasion speak or act according to the law of probability or necessity. And it is this universality at which poetry aims in the names he attaches to the personages. So you might be reading about someone called Oedipus, but Oedipus represents something larger than himself. It's not just a historical figure, it's something within human nature. The lesson of Oedipus Rex is don't be curious. The natural response to that is, how can you not be curious? How can you not want to find things out? But that curiosity can lead to our undoing. We are inevitably drawn to our own destruction, it would seem to say. So, poetry looks at something within the universal human condition, and this again informs the idea of liberal humanism, that there is a human condition which runs from Aristotle right up to the present day, and is touched upon by great literature throughout the centuries. Originality, because we put a lot of stead on originality, saying I think it's very important. The poet or maker should be the maker of plots rather than of verses, since he is a poet because he imitates, and what he imitates are actions. And even if he chances to take an historical subject, he is nonetheless a poet. You don't have to create your own story. If you are a poet, you're a poet by virtue of mimesis, not in sense of starting afresh. As we know from looking at poetry, originality is a post-romantic concept, and something that was actually thrown out again in the 20th century. So originality as a concept went from around 1750 to around 1920. 170 years of privilege. And yet we still think being original is important. But not necessarily, and B, might not even be possible. So you can write about history and still be a poet, not an historian. Again, the tragic hero. We touched upon this before with Oedipus. The change of fortune presented must not be the spectacle of a virtuous man brought from prosperity to adversity, because that would be unfair and horrible, nor again that of a bad man passing from adversity to prosperity, because that would annoy us, like that person who won the national lottery despite clearly being a thug, and everyone was really annoyed at him for having the temerity to be lucky. Nor again should the downfall of the utter villain be exhibited. So what do we want? Somewhere in the middle, the golden mean again. There remains the character between these two extremes, that of a man who is not eminently good and just, yet whose misfortune is brought about not by vice or depravity, but by some error or frailty, hamartia. This is one of our key terms. That error or frailty, as we've said, it might be a fault that is committed, it might be an internal or inherent fault, particular to that type of character. He must be one who is highly renowned and prosperous, as we said, persons like Oedipus, Thyestes, or other illustrious men of such families. Again, men. Because that was Aristotle's thing. We're doing all right. So, one form of hamartia, of error, is hubris. Hubris is when you bring down upon yourself the vengeance of the gods because you are being too proud and lofty and thinking yourself too high. It's one thing to be prosperous and lofty. It's another thing to think of yourself as being prosperous and lofty. If you truly are noble, you act in a noble way. You don't have to say, look at me. I'm all this, and a bag of chips. Pride breeds the tyrant. This is what hubris does. From the father of the nation, you become a tyrant. I mean, a tyrant, it has to be borne in mind, was just a particular name. Tyrant now, often we think of as being a very negative thing, but a tyrant just meant a ruler of a Greek city-state who was ruling on their own. But here you can see that negative connotation creeping in. Pride breeds the tyrant. Swollen with ill-found booty, from castled height, pride tumbles to the pit. Peripeteia, reversal of the situation. All footing lost. Pride will make you blind. And then you will suffer. Again, King Lear is one of the most obvious examples of hubris in action, of hubris bringing about downfall. Kent says to Lear, "What wouldst thou do, old man?" That's excellent. Kent says, "Old man," to Lear. King Lear says, "You come not between the dragon and his wrath." You don't want him. And Kent says, "What, you fool? Thinkst thou that duty shall have dread to speak when power to flattery bows? To plainness honour's bound, when majesty falls to folly." Kent is the voice which upbraids Lear throughout, saying, "You're committing hubris, you're being foolish, you're being blind, you're being proud." And you have to remember, there's no duty owed to you once you stop being the father of your nation, once you start just being a tyrant. The range of tragedy. 24 hours. It should be rapid. And that helps to shock and surprise. Now, Shakespeare often doesn't do this. Lots of playwrights don't stick to this. But these are called the unities of time and place. Single revolution of the sun, 24 hours for the play to take place. One particular location. So, tragedy endeavours as far as possible to confine itself to a single revolution of the sun, or but slightly to exceed this limit, whereas the epic action has no limits of time. The Iliad takes place over 10 years, for example. The best tragedies are founded on the story of a few houses, as we've already seen. So, you contain your tragedy within time and within space, because then it has unity. King Lear. It reduced Samuel Johnson almost to tears. The ending of King Lear was often thought to be so sad that it was actually, in 1680, rewritten with a happy ending. Cordelia doesn't die, she actually goes off and marries Edgar, and they all have a very happy life. Whereas in King Lear, it's unremittingly bleak. There was no real happy ending in this. Everyone just dies in the worst way. The goodies get killed by the baddies. And even when you think it's all over, the final goodie, Cordelia, is meant to have rescued everyone, she is hanged in her cell. And this is the response of Kent and Edgar is doing something similar to the chorus in Greek tragedy. It's directing our emotions. You're saying, this is what you should be feeling. And Kent asks, is this the promised end? It's as if the characters are in shock. This isn't how it should work. We've had the miserable stuff. Surely it was as low as it could be. Surely things were as bad as they could be. We can't have any more. Lear and Cordelia are in prison. Or image of that horror. Image there to mean representation. The weight of this sad time we must obey. Speak what we feel. Not what we ought to say. The oldest hath borne most, we that are young shall never see so much, nor live so long. Most of the younger characters have died, in fact. There's only a handful of people remaining at the end of Lear. And it is you see it's part of that kind of negative aspect which creeps into Shakespeare's plays around this time. This is written around the same time as Macbeth, which is one of the most unremittingly bleak plays you'll ever read. About life as just being a strutting player. The end of Macbeth, the kind of judgment of humanity, is profoundly bleak. Life is a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. That is all that life is. It's a stupid story, and then you die, and it doesn't mean anything. And this is, again, when you read Shakespeare, you think, well, that was a barrel of laughs. But it's part of what tragedy is doing to us.